So glad you could join us today. So SharePoint governance is an interesting topic. I think that people have different expectations of what they will hear given that kind of a title. I think typically the IT area has spent a good deal of time in governance around technical controls. But in my experience as a SharePoint consultant, I run into the fact that really governance actually happens in the end user community regardless of the technical controls. And so that's really kind of my focus today. SharePoint usually begins in some sort of organized hierarchical fashion. You may be a large organization with a server farm and then several SharePoint servers. You may be a smaller organization with a single SharePoint site. That's kind of my world that we'll be showing you today, single SharePoint site. Then, of course, under that, you'll have sub-sites and perhaps sub-sub-sites. Then each site, of course, will own its objects. For example, libraries, calendars, and tasks, and, of course, the many, many other types of objects that can be owned under SharePoint sub-sites and sites. We start out with the best of intentions. We end up here without governance. So we think that we're going to grow in some organized fashion, and then people don't understand the purpose of a sub-site. Should I have a sub-site? Should I have a page? Do I really need another library? Do I just need metadata? And without proper training and without an understanding of what governance is and does, you do end up with that kind of a mess. And what's wrong with it, other than the fact that it's unwieldy, what's wrong with that? There's risk. There's lack of engagement. If people can't find what they're looking for, they're kind of done. Think about how long you spend on a website where you can't find precisely what you need in just a few clicks. And then your processes break down. One of the nice things about SharePoint, if used properly, is it can facilitate, enhance, speed up, streamline business processes unless it grows improperly, and then those processes are even worse off than they were before. The risk, of course, is that people are using the wrong data from the wrong sources, that security breaks down because of the intricacies of permissions required to maintain this unwieldy environment. So we have problems. Lack of governance is more than just a problem with out-of-control growth. It actually does introduce risks into the environment. The other side of this with governance, I guess it's the 180-degree polar opposite view, is where IT has tightly controlled SharePoint to the extent where you can't actually grow it the way it's needed. Then what you really have there is lack of engagement. You may also be introducing risk. I've been around the data security world since the late 70s, early 80s. Some would say that my ilk actually created the problem. I'm not necessarily sure they would be wrong. But that said, the smarter the mousetraps are, the smarter the mice get. So if you lock everything down, people will find a way around things, and it may be inappropriate methods. So, for example, in a very innocuous, very kind of non-impactful, well, sort of non-impactful way, if we are intended to use policies from a policy library because those policies have been approved and blessed, but I can't get to what I need and I can't find the policy I need to reference, I'm going to ask somebody to email me their copy. Now, I don't know what version of this thing it is. It is now on my hard drive, and I may never go out after an update, so I don't even know from day to day whether I'm relying on the correct information. So obviously, without governance, if it's a free-for-all, things go badly. If it's locked down too tight, things go badly. With proper governance, then we have this feeling that we can grow our SharePoint environment according to a set of rules and keep eyes on it. Now, to give you an expectation about today's program, we're going to begin talking a lot about policies, procedures, guidelines, the governance document. We are going to then transition to actually going into the SharePoint environment, creating a governance site, working with some of the controls around lists and libraries and sites. So For those of you who came for the policies and procedures and guidelines discussion, you're going to hear that first. For those of you wondering whether we're actually going to see anything live, you are. We're going to kind of do this first, the policy, then the actual practice. So hang on if you were expecting the latter more than the former. So when we do governance in the beginning, governance drives site collection growth. Two general schools of thought. I work with an organization quite frequently here in beautiful sunny Chicago, Illinois, who does not permit any additional subsites beyond the ones that were originally created in the hierarchy. They permit site owners to create pages, but they may not create additional subsites. I have seen it the other way around too, where subsites can be created, but they need to be approved. But in whichever way you choose, none of those is either right nor wrong, but it will govern site collection growth. It also governs content inclusion and exclusion. Some of you may be in shops where SharePoint is used specifically for a type of information and no other type of information. So in one organization I just got done working with out west, there is no formal business records are considered official if they are in SharePoint. Business records have their own systems, whether it's SAP or some other type of source data management system that's used for that, their own CRM, for example. But there's content out in SharePoint which is meant for sharing and collaboration that is apart from business records, and that is their line that they draw around what content may or may not be included. Governance also drives access control. One of the biggest decisions around governance, and this is done with participation and involvement heavily from IT, is what sort of access is everyone permitted, and then how do we then close gaps, close gates according to the type or the location of the data. For example, if everyone is assumed to have read access to all content, and then along the way a subsite is created with information that really is not meant for everyone's eyes, then that is where you begin to lock down security. It is usually a bad idea, as I can, again, speak from all those years of being a part of the security community and maybe not making the greatest decisions out front. You can't lock everything up and then open things up sporadically. You will end up causing yourself more work than it's worth. But if everyone has read access and then you lock down only what you need, if you allow everyone on a particular team or department or site members, that group, members of an organization that has a site of their own, allow everybody contribute access. Doesn't mean they can necessarily edit each other's documents, but they can all add things. But you need to think through that. Again, none of these scenarios is either right nor wrong. It just needs to be defined when you start thinking about it. Content processes. How does content get in to SharePoint? Does it need to be approved? There is a feature that I'll show you later on when we start getting into the actual mouse clicks around setting up library features and list features. And this is for both libraries and lists, by the way, where anybody can contribute, but it does not become live or visible to the general community of viewers, readers, members, until it's approved. And I really like this process for lots of different applications. One of the things I like it best for is in a regulatory world, or a world that is heavily regulated, is that, you may know a regulation, my orientation really comes from banking, so if we know that a new regulation is going in place August 1st, or let's push it farther down the road, September 1st, I'm actually working on those policy modifications now that put us in compliance with that policy on September 1st. Now, I don't want those policies visible. On September 1st, I now want them visible. So there is a built-in process control around this called draft item approval that is very easy. It's a single checkbox to turn it on, and perhaps a setup of a couple more people in a special group that can approve documents. So it drives all of these things. And the other thing it drives that a lot of people don't think about is it drives end-user training. So a lot of governance is technically controlled. Some governance is controlled by oversight. You know, we're looking through it, we're monitoring it, we're logging, we're reporting it. And honestly, a good deal of it is just common practice, what people will do with the information. If you make it difficult for somebody to find something, they're going to store it on their hard drive, and then you never know if they've got the right version of it. If you make it easy and you let them know that the intent is not for you to store it on your hard drive. So a lot of organizations require that when you submit a report, in the footer is the actual path where that document came from. And if you set up a guideline in your world that, hey, if that path is a C drive, we're done. We're not even looking at it, because to me the report itself is suspect. But if it shows the URL from the SharePoint site or the path from the SharePoint site, then we're okay. So you can set things around that, but end users have to know what is expected